The once peaceful Caribbean Sea, long known for its turquoise waters and vibrant cultures, is now the center of a dangerous and rapidly escalating standoff between the United States and Venezuela. What was once a region associated with tourism and trade has become a flashpoint for international conflict, drawing the eyes of the world to its shores. What began as a U.S. anti-drug operation has spiraled far beyond its original scope, erupting into deadly military clashes and raising urgent questions about legality, proportionality, and the risk of a much wider war. The presence of heavily armed vessels and the constant threat of violence have transformed the atmosphere in the region, leaving local populations anxious and uncertain about what comes next. In early September 2025, the Trump administration announced a sweeping campaign against alleged narco-terrorist groups, deploying Navy warships and elite special operations teams off the coasts of Venezuela and Colombia. The operation, unprecedented in scale for the region, was intended to disrupt what U.S. officials described as a vast network of drug trafficking supposedly tied to President Nicolás Maduro's government. The official goal was clear: to stop the flow of illegal drugs, which American authorities claim are funding criminal organizations and propping up the Maduro regime. But beneath the surface, critics argue that the operation also serves as a show of force, sending a message to both allies and adversaries about U.S. resolve in the hemisphere. However, the mission has quickly turned deadly. Over 80 people have been killed so far, including both suspected traffickers and civilians caught in the crossfire. The distinction between law enforcement and open conflict has become dangerously blurred, with each new incident fueling tensions and mistrust on all sides. The crisis reached a breaking point on September 2nd, when a U.S. Navy strike destroyed a suspected smuggling vessel. Reports soon emerged that the Navy had also targeted survivors in the water, a move that shocked observers and drew immediate condemnation from human rights groups and foreign governments alike. This single act shifted the entire debate, from questions of drug policy and border security to the fundamental rules of war and the ethics of military engagement. The incident ignited global outrage, sparking protests, emergency meetings at the United Nations, and a wave of critical headlines around the world. Now, as of December, the United States has dramatically escalated its military presence in the Caribbean, including the deployment of its largest and most advanced aircraft carrier. Fighter jets and additional warships have joined the buildup, signaling that Washington is prepared for a prolonged confrontation if necessary. Venezuela, led by a defiant President Maduro, has responded with fierce rhetoric and military parades, vowing to resist what it calls American aggression. Anti-U.S. demonstrations have erupted in Caracas and beyond, as the Maduro government rallies its supporters and seeks to portray itself as a victim of foreign intervention. Across the region, ordinary people watch events unfold with a mix of fear and disbelief. Families at border checkpoints worry about their safety, while millions wonder how this crisis will affect their lives and livelihoods. The stakes are high, not just for Venezuela and the United States, but for the entire Caribbean and for America's global reputation. The world is watching, holding its breath as the next move in this high-stakes confrontation could change the course of history, not only for the Caribbean, but for the balance of power in the 21st century. The White House maintains that its recent actions are both legal and necessary, emphasizing that the United States is acting within its rights to protect national security and international stability. Officials stress that the campaign is aimed squarely at dismantling powerful transnational criminal networks, not at targeting the Venezuelan government or its people directly. According to Washington, these operations are designed to disrupt illicit activities that threaten the safety of Americans and the region. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, one of the main architects behind the policy, has been outspoken in his support for the strikes. He has repeatedly defended both the strategy and the military commander who executed the orders, arguing that swift action was essential to prevent further criminal activity. The administration asserts that every operation was carefully planned and executed in accordance with the law of armed conflict, as well as strict, pre-approved rules of engagement. Legal advisors were involved at every stage to ensure compliance with international norms. Framing the campaign as part of a larger effort to restore democracy in Venezuela, officials highlight President Trump's demands for Nicolás Maduro's resignation and the imposition of a no-fly zone as key steps. They argue these measures are necessary to pressure the regime and support the Venezuelan people's aspirations for freedom. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has confirmed that the strikes were fully authorized at the highest levels, insisting that U.S. operations are focused solely on corrupt elites and criminal actors, not on ordinary Venezuelan citizens. She reiterates that the administration's goal is to protect innocent lives. By aggressively cutting off the flow of drug money, Washington argues it is directly undermining Maduro's grip on power. Officials claim that choking off these illicit funds will weaken the regime's ability to oppress its people and ultimately open the door to a democratic transition. In the face of stalled diplomatic efforts, the U.S. casts itself as a force for law and order, decisive and resolute where negotiations have failed. The administration insists that its actions are not only justified, but necessary to restore peace and stability in the region. The heart of the controversy is the September 2nd strike's aftermath. After the initial attack on a suspected smuggling boat, a second strike reportedly targeted survivors clinging to debris, an act widely condemned as a violation of international law. Under the Geneva Conventions, shipwrecked combatants are protected. Targeting them could be a war crime. Legal experts and human rights groups demand accountability, arguing the survivors posed no threat. The administration denies ordering the killings, but confirms the second strike was authorized, fueling calls for transparency and the release of incident footage. The deaths have put a human face on the policy, sparking bipartisan outrage and shifting the debate from strategy to morality. The incident now symbolizes the dangers of unchecked military power. In Washington, President Trump stands before the press, defending his administration's tough stance on Venezuela. He emphasizes the need for decisive action to protect American interests and regional stability, but is careful to distance himself from the most controversial actions taken by the military. Trump insists that his administration is acting in the best interests of both the United States and the Venezuelan people, while also making it clear that he does not support unnecessary escalation. He stands by Defense Secretary Hegseth, praising his leadership and resolve, even as he acknowledges the troubling nature of the follow-up strike that resulted in civilian casualties. Trump expresses regret for the loss of life, but frames it as an unfortunate consequence of a necessary mission. After Maduro rejected Trump's demand to step down, the U.S. escalated its response by imposing a no-fly zone over Venezuela. This move is seen as a direct challenge to Venezuelan sovereignty and a clear signal that Washington is prepared to use military power to achieve its objectives. The world watches as tensions rise, with many fearing that the situation could spiral out of control. In Caracas, President Nicolas Maduro appears defiant, denouncing the U.S. strikes as acts of psychological terrorism and labeling them as the beginning of a new chapter in American aggression. He vows to defend Venezuela's independence at all costs, rallying his supporters and calling for unity in the face of foreign intervention. Maduro rejects U.S. claims of narco-terrorism, dismissing them as fabricated pretexts for intervention and the seizure of Venezuela's vast oil and mineral resources. He accuses Washington of using propaganda to justify its actions and urges the international community to stand with Venezuela. In response to the strikes, Venezuelan officials announced their own investigation, acknowledging that citizens were killed in the attacks. They promised transparency and justice for the victims, while also condemning what they describe as violations of international law. Attorney General Tarek William Saab takes the stage, accusing President Trump of coveting Venezuela's natural resources and calling for renewed dialogue between the two nations. He urges restraint and diplomacy, warning that further escalation could have devastating consequences for the region. Both sides use the crisis to rally domestic support, with leaders framing themselves as defenders of democracy in the United States and of sovereignty in Venezuela. The streets fill with passionate crowds, each waving their national flags and chanting slogans as the world's attention remains fixed on the unfolding crisis. The rhetoric on both sides grows more intense, signaling a nation bracing for conflict. As military forces mobilize and citizens take to the streets, the risk of a larger confrontation looms, leaving the future of Venezuela and the region uncertain. The strikes have triggered rare bipartisan alarm in Congress, with lawmakers demanding answers from the Pentagon and White House. Both Senate and House Armed Services committees have launched investigations into the legality and execution of the strikes. Democrats, led by Chuck Schumer, demand Defense Secretary Hegseth testify and call for the release of all incident footage. Even some Republicans express unease, insisting on oversight to ensure U.S. actions align with law and military doctrine. A classified briefing with Admiral Bradley will be pivotal. Its outcome could determine future congressional support for the campaign. The U.S. strikes have drawn global condemnation, with the legality of the second strike dominating debate. Allies and adversaries warn that attacking shipwrecked survivors violates the Geneva Conventions and risks eroding wartime norms. The Organization of American States calls for restraint, while Russia and China use the incident to challenge U.S. influence. The U.S. military's command structure faces scrutiny for possible legal lapses. The perception of a war crime has damaged America's reputation and could affect future alliances. Critics argue the U.S. has isolated itself, undermining its own calls for international law. The world is watching to see if Washington will escalate or heed calls for diplomacy. The stakes for global order and U.S. credibility have never been higher. As the year ends, the U.S.-Venezuela standoff teeters between escalation and restraint. Ongoing investigations and Admiral Bradley's briefing could force a change in course or embolden the White House to press on. The U.S. military buildup, including a carrier strike group, keeps all options on the table, even the risky prospect of ground forces. For Venezuelans, the threat of wider war looms over a nation already in crisis. Some opposition figures see U.S. pressure as a path to democracy, despite the risks. The choices made now will shape the lives of millions and the future of the hemisphere. The world waits, hoping for accountability and peace.